welcome to all you brave people. You heard what I just heard. Aren't you glad you're in here instead of outside? I'm really happy to welcome everyone here tonight, both as a member of the board of the Better Government Association and as a panelist tonight. It is especially important to be supporting the BGA. That film, let's hear it for the film. That was really fabulous. And so, in addition to being on the panel and on the board, we're honoring Women's Month. And I think women's history is one that's often forgotten. So I'm glad that BGA thought of doing something to support Women's Month. And I hope you'll all continue to think about the contributions women have made. And I'm Jill Wine-Banks. I forgot to introduce myself, sorry. And I am very happy to be talking about the topic we're talking about. Is this too loud? No? Perfect. Seems loud. As some of you know, I served on the Watergate team as one of the prosecutors, so I know something about holding power to account. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how do you hold the top government officials to account? And we have a great panel for that, obviously. The abuses of power can only be controlled by taking steps to do what we have done in the past and what we are going to have to do going forward. BGA, of course, is completely nonpartisan, and we rely on all the participants like you. People here who are brave enough to brave the weather, but also, I'm sure if you're here, it's because you are an active participant in our democracy, and that's an important thing. I want to say I wish I could read this, but I can't. I work hard to support the BGA. It's one of Illinois' best organizations that I've ever been affiliated with for nearly a century. Actually, I believe we passed the 100-year mark. It's actually for more than a century now. BGA has challenged unchecked power and worked to strengthen all kinds of transparency and accountability in government. Through the Illinois Answers Project, which is one of our newer forums, the newsroom has been doing amazing work, but also BGA policy. I used to chair the BGA policy committee, and I know how important it is that you not just report and find out the solutions, the problems, but that you solve them through the policy proposals. We have connected investigative reporting with the solutions through the policy group. It's one of the reasons I'm so proud to be part of BGA. My Watergate experience, as I said, has definitely served me to understand, but also I was general counsel of the Army and Solicitor General and Deputy Attorney General of the state of Illinois. And that has taught me a lot about accountability and that facts matter. And that's some of the important things that the BGA newsroom does. And as I said, it doesn't happen without accountability and without the participation of you. But it requires the independent journalism, ethical leadership, strong institutions, and an engaged public. So we have to be willing to ask the hard questions. And that's what we're doing tonight. Most of all, I want to thank you again, because an engaged citizenship is really what will protect our democracy. Tonight's panel is really a great one. We have some people who have been involved in advancing accountability every day in the newsroom, in government, and in civic leadership, and in policy reform. And I'm thrilled to be joined by the exceptional panelists who, I'm going to turn this over to our person, our BGA head of Senior Policy Analyst, Sophia Van Pelt. She's going to guide us through our conversation. She is someone who works on accountability all the time. So, Sophia, would you please introduce everyone?
Jill, thank you so very much for your remarks and for joining us on this lovely panel. Let me, and thank you all so much for joining, and this is an important topic, and I'm so glad everyone braved the weather today to come out and hear the four wonderful panelists we have speak on it. Let me introduce first Deborah Witzburg. Deborah Witzburg has been the Deputy Inspector General for Public Safety, overseeing independent objective evaluation and reviews of Chicago's police and police accountability agencies, And now as Inspector General, her goal is enhancing public safety, protecting civil liberties and civil rights, and improving the relationship between the police and the communities they serve. She previously worked as assistant state's attorneys in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office and got her JD from Northwestern here in Chicago. Next we have Ruby Bailey, the editor-in-chief of the Illinois Answers Project. But before that, she's spent 30 years in journalism, including roles at the USA Today, the Indy Star. Sorry, I just read what's on the sheets. The Sacramento Bee, and the Detroit Free Press. We also are joined by Jane Ruby, president of the League of Women Voters of Chicago since 2022, but she's been a board member since 2018. And we are joined, last but certainly not least, by Jill Wine-Banks, a distinguished attorney, an MSNBC legal analyst, and a prominent figure in political and legal discourse, co-host of 2 top-rated podcasts, #Sisters-in-Law and iGen Politics, and as she said, a Watergate prosecutor and proud BGA board member. Thank you, and please, everyone, thank our panelists for joining us. Now that you all know who is up here, we want to know more about you all. So please bear with us. We are trying something a little bit new. We are trying out a new program called Menti. So please take out your phones. There should be there certainly is a QR code up on the screen. Scan the QR code, and you will find a poll with 6 questions. Feel free to move along if you're faster than the rest of the class, but I'm going to read out the questions now. How have you interacted with BGA before? What is your zip code? What best describes your field or industry? What career phase are you in? And hopefully, ideally, in a moment, we'll have answers coming up for question number 5. Name a woman who inspires you most. And finally, how hopeful are you about the role women leaders play in strengthening government accountability? We'll give everyone a few seconds to fill all that out. Can I ask panelists, do you all have a woman who inspires you most? Leader or otherwise? Personal life, professional life? Oh, Ruby, your name is on the screen.
Oh. I pay well.
Can I be a nerd and say Jill Wine-Banks?
And I'd say Jane Ruby.
Oh.
But actually, I would say a lot of my friends inspire me. They are really amazing women who understand the value of civic participation and do it. They don't just believe in it, they do it. But who also believe in networking, one of the least valued skills that I think women are very good at. It's an essential element of succeeding in your career. I would say that almost every job that I have taken was the result of networking, that someone that I knew said, I just heard about a job that you'd be perfect for. I'm going to call the CEO and tell them they should interview you. And so I would say my friends inspire me.
I do think by the end, all panelists had their name on the wanted to share with you. I think that's incredible, actually. So today's conversation will be centered around women in leadership who hold power to account. And I think one of the themes, especially as we were talking about all this before, is the fact that when you are socialized as a woman, you are taught different skills. You are presented with different difficulties that mean you have to overcome them. And I do think that cooperation and networking is the sort of skill that is precisely one of the things that is taught to women in a different way than men, that allows us to be leaders, if not better, but certainly different, and bring different skill set. But I wanted to begin our discussion with, what does accountability look like? What does it mean to you? How does it work? Perhaps Jane, if you wouldn't mind getting us started, when you think about accountability in this moment, what does it actually require beyond rhetoric? What does accountability mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think accountability is everything. It's, what happens in your sort of day-to-day life interactions, and it also happens, we all have a civic responsibility to hold our governments accountable, and being a citizen is a 24/7 job. Everything you do in your life is impacted by government policy and such, and so, we have a moral responsibility to really hold power to account in that capacity.
Deborah, can I turn it over to you, especially as we're thinking about accountability? What is needed in order to make sure that we can make structural changes? How do we hold people accountable in a way that lasts?
In our work at the Office of Inspector General, we spend a lot of time thinking about the need to do two things at one time, and that is to hold individual bad actors accountable in a very concrete way, and to work toward the kind of structural change you're talking about. The first of those things is easier at least to conceptualize. Very hard to do in practice, but easier at least to conceptualize, where we are identifying individual cases of bad actors breaking the rules. And when those people are in positions of power, that is hard to do. That is a steep hill to climb. But, right, if you want to right a wrong, shine the light of truth upon it. So identifying individual bad acts is sort of something that, at least conceptually, I think is pretty accessible. I think structural change is much harder. It takes much longer. Structural change, in my view, is about persuading people to expect better. And unless and until we can do that, this is just piecework. It's just one thing on the assembly line, one bad actor at a time on the assembly line, and we are in no danger of running out of that particular supply here in Chicago. This is a joke, which because my husband is in the room, I'll give him credit for, but we say like corruption is a growth industry in Illinois, and we're not like about to fix it. And so if we are actually going to slow down that particular conveyor belt, then it's gonna be through structural change. And I think persuading people to expect better is how we get to political accountability for bad government.
What I'm hearing especially is that there is this tie between your role as a leader and working with the community. Community also builds up leaders. Ruby, do you mind if I ask you, especially in your role as a journalist, and then leading a newsroom, how do you work with community, and how does the work of journalism empower community to then hold people to account? What does that look like?
You've just answered the question. You don't even need me. Look at you. Among the things we do is to try to make sure that folks are able to tell their own stories and to amplify their own voices. And so in giving them some of the tools that they may need, whether that is simply information as we publish or other tools through databases or holding community listening sessions so that we can better understand and allow them to frame the topics and the definitions of what we think we know to be true, are the ways in which we at least attempt to be transparent, to be open, and to hold ourselves accountable for the things that we then want to publish and the stories that we want to tell. So to allow people to, in some ways, and not just inform, but to help narrate their own stories.
That is incredibly interesting. So there is this back and forth here that is happening. And I feel like one of the things that's important for this back and forth is guardrails, both like structural ones and then also ones of norm. Jill, what institutional guardrails are most important, and what have you learned from your experience with Watergate and since?
Well, I certainly know that guardrails have been abolished. I think we all have seen the end of the guardrails, and during Watergate, there were a couple of things that made a big difference. One, there were only 3 networks, and they all had the same facts. There was bipartisanship, there was a cooperation, there was a sense that if you got to compromise, it was a good thing. Getting something was better than nothing. We've lost all of that. And then all the norms that we thought you couldn't even think about laws that you could put in place to capture those norms now need to be captured in some way and put into law, because without, something like the emoluments clause doesn't have any consequences, and therefore Donald Trump just blows right through it. And if we don't have consequences for it, then we're going to keep on losing the accountability that could come. possibly as a lawyer, I've been both a defense lawyer, but mostly a prosecutor. And as such, I see the accountability coming from the justice system. And I do see that it's still happening. If you look at what's protecting some of our rights right now, it is the courts. They are holding the government accountable. It shouldn't be that way. Congress, number one, has given up its role and needs to reassert its position in the power of the purse, the power of declaring war. Those are things that belong to Congress. And if they walk away from it, and the majority is getting thinner and thinner every day, but right now, because the majority is the same as the president, they're not holding the president accountable. And so I think that's what's missing right now, is the government holding its own self to account, and leaving it up to the courts and to all of us as voters. Jane is wearing a vote necklace, maybe the most important message of the night, especially since the primary is, less than a week away. Take the time to learn who the candidates are, and then speak up. Get out there and vote. It's really important.
I'm hearing myself wonder, especially as a leader, and as all of you are, what I'm hearing is that this is a particularly hard moment to be a leader. The dynamics that are the world itself make things a little bit more difficult, because, as you said, certain guardrails that you thought were never going to go away are now gone, which leads to questions such as, how do you build them back up? Do you have to build back something new? Do you have to build back something different? Do you try and put back? Right, these are all questions that, on top of like running organizations, you're left trying to contend with. For anyone on the panel, would you care to talk about what sort of, especially in this moment, in this day and age, what is it like being a leader, and what sort of challenges or potentially opportunities are faced in this moment?
I'll go. So I run a chapter of an organization that's been around for over 100 years as well, and we've sort of always been in the defending democracy business. But really, sort of to meet the moment, we kind of have to look at, defending democracy in the big D sense of what democracy is, but we also have to sort of really reconcile, and myself as a leader, talking about why it's important to vote and such. We also have to kind of check the privilege around, all of these rights and responsibilities and things, didn't just happen overnight. They weren't just, gifted to people. Not everyone in this room at one point even was able to vote. And so sort of understanding that, democracy is something to build on, expand on, and really kind of take this moment not only to defend sort of inherent principles regarding our Constitution and stuff, but also look at what comes next. What does expanding democracy look like? What does creating a much more just and inclusive democracy look like in this country is, sort of really kind of a thing, instead of doom scrolling and spiraling and being just upset about the state of the world, it's like, let's take this moment and look at what comes next. How can we really sort of make a democracy that we're all proud to participate in?
Can I take it from two different perspectives, different than Jane? And one is that I think everyone in this room can be and should be a leader. We all have people that we interact with, whether it's a small group of friends, whether you have a social media platform with 100 followers or 1,000 or 500,000, whatever you have a way of influencing them and being a leader by speaking out, by knowing the facts and speaking in a coherent fashion, by writing op-eds, by writing letters to the editor. So I think leadership can be much more diffuse these days than it was in the past, where the president got to speak to the public. Now all of us get to speak to the public. I'm very lucky that I don't have to yell at my television. I can yell at all of you. And so that gives me a special obligation to stay up on the news, to be informed about all the details of everything that's going on. And I take that responsibility seriously. But the other thing, I want to go back to something you asked earlier, because this is Women's History Month. And, you said that we are trained differently, which is probably true. Certainly for me, I'm sure I'm the oldest panelist here by a lot. And I certainly was raised in an era when I wrote my book and the publisher suggested the title Watergate Girl. I said, not with my name on it. The word girl is not going on that book. And my editor said, what captures the era that you're writing about better than the word girl? And in fact, we were considered girls. When I asked for my first trial at the Department of Justice, my boss said to me, well, you can handle appeals because there's only lawyers in the courtroom. But in the trial, I was in the organized crime section, there's going to be made members of the mafia in the room. And you'd be much more vulnerable than the men, so I can't let you try a case against the mafia. And I simply said, what didn't you notice about me when you hired me as a trial lawyer? I want the trial. But if I hadn't stood up for myself, I'd still be an appellate lawyer. And I would never have had, obviously, the Watergate opportunity. On the other hand, all that extra trial experience, appellate experience, qualified me to be Illinois' first Solicitor General, because I actually had done a lot of appellate work. So, you can make lemons out of lemonade, but I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I had to speak up. And I think that women have been discriminated against, obviously. And Jane was just telling me that there's a new movement to take away the vote, to abolish the 19th Amendment. And I'm not surprised. It's certainly something that you could see coming from Project 2025. So let's celebrate where we have gotten as women. But let's also remember that we have to keep fighting, because we have children in the room who are going to grow up to be president one day, I hope, and who will vote for a woman who will be president even before they are old enough to be president. But if we don't keep fighting, we aren't going to get there.
Jill's comments are so resonant for me, and I think one of the hard things is to wonder about how far we have actually come. I will say, in reflecting on today's subject, I have really struggled with the idea of being a woman in leadership, being a woman leader. That is something that has really stuck in my teeth. Because I have not wanted to be a woman leader, I've just wanted to be a leader.
Yes.
And I have felt like I didn't want an asterisk next to my name. And I didn't want to do a good job for a girl. And that is something I have really struggled with, and I have over the years been very resistant to sort of exactly this sort of conversation, because nobody gets men up here and says, how do you feel about being a man in leadership, right? I'm sure they wouldn't hesitate to tell us, but I really struggled with that, and that has been, I will say, somewhat to my own detriment. Changing my mind is not my strongest suit, but this is something that I have sort of come around on, and that's for a couple of reasons, including the idea that if we don't talk about a problem, probably the problem sticks around. But I have also, I've learned a lot in this job. I'm the first woman to serve as the city's Inspector General. It's astonishing to me that there are still jobs where there are people who can say that out loud, but here we are. And boy, has it been an adventure, and it's one that has taught me a lot. Among the things I have come to think about being a woman in leadership is, and maybe this kind of goes to the notion that there are things to be hopeful about, two things. One is that I have found tremendous strategic advantage in being underestimated. If you're doing it right, you let people do that once, and not a second time. That has served me very well, so I will say that. And being underestimated is an experience familiar, I would wager, to everybody on this panel and many of you in this room. I have been out in the city talking about my office's work and been told by elected officials that my hair is the wrong color. I had an elected official call and leave a message with my office. I called him back and he asked if I was returning phone calls for the Inspector General. I had a supervisor doing oversight work who told me that he preferred to work with men. I eventually replaced him and got paid 10% less to do the job, even though I had a law degree and he didn't. Being underestimated is a regular part of the experience of doing these jobs, and I will just say I have found there's some strategic advantage in that. The other thing I will say is that maybe because of experiences just like those, women are accustomed to improbable victories. And that has maybe never been more important than now, when what we're up against is so enormous, and an improbable victory is so much what democracy needs, and I'm not sure anybody has more practice at that than women in leadership.
That was incredibly well said. Incredibly well said. Thank you. I'm also thinking, so you said you were the very first woman, like, as Inspector General, and that is often a position that a lot of people find themselves, a lot of women find themselves in, and people with various marginalized statuses where they are the first, and this comes with both heightened scrutiny and then also like when you do accomplish something, people treat it with like kind of kid gloves where your accomplishments are never going to be quite as high, and but the floor is so much lower. How does it? I mean, what is it like for everyone to be in this position? Like, is this? And who do you look up to? Right? Like, you kind of are forging your own path, especially when you are a first and there is no one to be looking up to. Is that exciting where you get to kind of carve out your own way and you get to like win over people who are not expecting it? Or does it end up feeling more challenging?
Well, since you so kindly noted how long I've been in journalism, my introduction, yeah.
Reporting the facts.
That's it, facts. It's 36 years, just so that you've got the full 36, yes.
Blame whoever wrote my card.
It's okay, no. And actually, I will say that a certain duality exists for me, in that I was about 6 months pregnant when I waddled into my first newsroom as a reporter. They didn't know I was pregnant, this is what the editor told me, he just thought I was fat. That's very helpful, but that is okay, right? It has to be. So I would say that things are better in some ways and absolutely horrifically worse in others. When I was in DC, when I was a reporter and I was in the Washington Bureau and they wanted to send reporters to Iraq, right? My supervisor wanted me to go. And there was a meeting of the editors, and there were editors in the room who said she can't go because she has a child. And it was this particular editor who said, we'll ask her if she wants to go. She gets to determine the reasons for why she doesn't go, right? Interestingly enough, those were all women in that room. Every single one of them were women in that room. And I say that to say simply this. There are times when I think to survive and to make it, that women may at times pick up some of the elements of what men seem to think leadership is, or the corporate kind of mentality is, or the way things are done. It's just the way things are. This is how we do it. So being a woman in a position, or being the first woman in a position, or being the first Black woman in a position, simply means, at least I've learned, for some people, it simply means I get to present myself in the chair, but I don't get to run the room the way I otherwise might, right? I get to look different in all those ways that I look different, and all those things that, you know, are inherent in me, that my perspective might be different, my lived experience might be different, my priorities might be different, the ways in which I think and strategize, the ways in which I try to motivate, the ways in which I choose to deploy resources might be different. They in some ways can't be, because I'm in the chair, but I don't, you know, you have that seat at the table, but you don't run the table. I have learned that I don't have to run the table to run the room. Because like a lot to like what you mentioned.
I can confirm that.
Instant fact check.
When some people, not David, underestimate you, it is in fact extraordinarily powerful. When I was in Washington, D.C., and I covered the White House, and I would go over to the Capitol, and I was often mistaken for a clerk or someone's legal assistant or a legislative aide. So I would be able to get on the elevator that only the senators and the representatives were supposed to be able to get on, because they just assumed what I was, right, or who I was. So I don't even know what was your question? Just be my
I
age.
think you absolutely
answer
answered
it?
it.
Okay,
I do. I want to
fantastic.
bring up to everyone. We do have another QR code on the screen. Please bring out your phones and fill out questions if you would like. We'll be taking questions from the audience later. One of the things that came up to me though, as you were talking, is that one of the other flip sides of being the first is that you also have all of the pressure from, like, you have to represent everyone now, right? Like, if you were the first woman to do something, you have to represent all women, everyone, everywhere. And one place that I've seen this recently is Sarah McBride is the first trans woman in Congress. And as incredibly exciting as that is for trans folks, she also both has to prove to all cis people that trans people can handle this, and also has to handle the scrutiny from trans people. The moment she steps out and is not doing being a trans woman right, all trans people are upset. The moment that she tries to make way with one group, another group is going to kind of, has that been, and on top of that, there are other dynamics of being a woman, such as being told that you don't have executive presence, whatever that means, lots of tone policing. And then on top of that, you have to look good the whole time. Something that I'm not gonna say names, but male leaders don't often have to. Love to.
So let me just say, as someone who has been first in almost every job I've held, and only for many years, I know the feeling of loneliness that is, and of, like, who do I ask for advice? When I had that issue about realizing the men were trying cases and I was still arguing appeals, who do I consult with? There's, talk to a man? No, that's not gonna solve it. It's when I graduated law school, only 4% of all lawyers were women. And of that 4%, almost zero were trial lawyers, which meant that every courtroom I entered, I was asked, whose secretary are you? And statistically, that was much more likely than that I was actually the advocate for one of the parties. And you just have to learn how to deal with that without giving up. It's tricky, it's hard. I think things are definitely better than they were. I mean, the statistics say a lot. I mean, half of every law school class now is female, maybe even higher than that. And there were quotas back when I was in, and I mean, Deborah, I can match you on all the stories about things that were told to me. Honestly, we could have the best conversation. We have to have lunch and do this, in terms of things that were said to me directly and assumptions that were made. Headlines during Watergate and reporting started with what I wore in court before what I said in court. And nobody reported that Rick Benveniste today wearing a pinstripe suit or Jim Neal today wearing a brown suit. No, it was only what I wore that got covered. And I mean, how you present yourself to a jury does matter, but it matters as much for how Jim and Rick presented themselves. Rick wearing a blazer and khaki pants when he wanted to appear vulnerable, and pinstripe when he wanted to appear, assertive. They didn't report on that. So I'm sort of used to it and sort of not used to it, and I don't know how you stop it. I don't know the world we're living in where we're going backwards with the movement to have women stay at home and have children. But to your point, it is really true when you're the first. I felt, it's sort of like being the oldest child. You're carrying the burden for all your siblings of, if you do something wrong, then they won't get the privilege you were given until later in life. And if you're the first woman, that it's not just you who's being evaluated, but all women. And that you have to be twice as good as a man to be considered half as good. And so you work even harder. It's not fair, but that's the reality. And so I hope we're getting past that stage, but I'm not sure we are. The other thing is, discrimination was legal when I started practicing. There was no EEOC. And I had when I moved to Washington and interviewed for one job with a Senate committee, they said, well, we can't hire you because all the other staff are men and there's travel involved and we can't possibly let you travel with a man. And they said it to my face. Nowadays, it's illegal, so people may think that and not hire you, but they won't say it. It may be easier to confront when someone says it to your face. Painful as that may be, it still may be easier than having them think it and not say it.
I'm wondering too, so as far as leadership goes, and there is this push and pull between there's powers above you and then there's also the community that is around you and that you are overseeing or you are working with. What is the relationship between leadership and accountability, and how does that play out with respect to community and the community that you guys serve?
This is something we give a lot of thought to in our work, where the only way that our work has any impact, the only way that it kind of lives in 3 dimensions is when people engage with our work. Our work is only as impactful as we are effective in talking about it. In fact, our communications director from our office is here, who like drives a lot of the magic behind the work here. But so we is doing a lot of work when I say this, but we can't do transparency work in secret. If we're shining a light into those windowless rooms in City Hall and nobody's looking, it's not doing any good. I will say, I use that expression a lot, the idea of shining a light into windowless rooms in City Hall. I've always meant that in like a metaphorical way, and then recently we uncovered some actual windowless rooms in City Hall and really took the wind out of the metaphor. But anyway, so right, if we're doing we can't do transparency work in secret. It only matters if people are watching. And if we're holding bad actors accountable, if the accountability tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, then we've not done very much to foster public trust. And so I think the way I think about leadership and accountability and transparency and community is that those are parts of a whole, and if we're serious about fostering public trust and improving government legitimacy and asking people to believe that we can do better, that we owe them better as an informed citizenry, then I think our engaging with those stakeholders is really critical. I think that's the only way we make the work matter.
I'm going to just say one thing when you talk about shining a flashlight. The BGA used to have a flashlight because we shined a light on things. I don't know if we should bring back that one. It was really a great gift. It was a pen with a flashlight.
David? I want a flashlight from BGA.
Get a BGA flashlight.
We have Office of Inspector General flashlights, Jill. We'll get you one of those.
Okay.
I want one too.
I want one.
Amber, we should get them.
Well, I mean, I think like with my organization, which is sort of a membership-based organization made up of volunteers and predominantly women, although men have been allowed to be in the league since the 70s. There's actually a great New York Times article about when men were allowed to join the league. It's wild, like that made the news. But, not only is it hard enough being predominantly a women's-based organization with women in the title, in just spaces that there aren't a lot of women, but also to be volunteers. And I think that, when I think about that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like volunteers, that is so powerful, because like you are doing this in your free time. You're not getting paid to do this. Like, how cool is it that you want to observe city council meetings? Like, I love that. But in a lot of spaces, that is not seen as a valued position. And so, there is a lot of sort of, in spaces, whether it's in this floor of City Hall and, having members of our organization there, whether it's, in the main city council chamber, whether it's out in the community, there's sort of this double sort of typecast that we have to sort of constantly overcome. And, that's really where sort of the role of being a citizen, like the civic responsibility comes into play and can be really powerful. Like, I mean, when we get our members involved in, calls to action, calling their alders, like people listen and people respond in that way. But it is definitely sort of an interesting space to kind of have to manage. And, I think, more volunteers should definitely be allowed to be in certain spaces.
we've spoken before also about the role of, in order to make change, you often both need an inside game and an outside game. You both have to be working within the system and you have to be working outside of it. A lot of us, for our careers, we've chosen to try and work within the system. But also, especially part of the role of, especially civic institutions, is to, and I believe I'm stealing your words here, expand the bounds of the inside game. Would you care to elaborate, or for anyone else as well, would you care to elaborate, like, what does it look like, and what does the role that civic institutions do play in expanding the bounds of the game? And
Can I take that one first? So a lot of I come from a background. I spent a time working sort of in the quote unquote like partisan politics space, and the amount of times that I was told like, no, we can't do that because a particular party doesn't want to do it, or no. There's constantly you're being told no because it doesn't fit in a particular story or narrative that a party or elected official wants to have. And so, a lot of times people are like, nonpartisan, like that's not a thing. And I'm like, actually, that is like the most groovy thing to be. And like, more organizations, more people should kind of be wearing that as a badge of honor, because like the amount of spaces I can go into now, like on behalf of a nonpartisan organization, and it's like I don't have to worry about people telling me no. I can advocate for what's like moral, for what's just, for what's the right thing to do, and is not constrained by what a particular party wants. Because you see how well that's gotten us in the current state of the world today. So I think that there is immense value in sort of existing in politics, in civics, in sort of, women's spaces, but also, in the nonpartisan space. And I think that being that kind of, in politics, but outsider as well, allows a lot more freedom to, advocate for transparency, advocate for what's right. And, people come to, all of our organizations as like trusted sources in sort of a moral compass of, what we can really have and what our future in democracy can really be.
I want to follow up on something Deborah said, which was about being a woman lawyer, or which I have always hated. I'm a lawyer. When I graduated from law school, I was married to a fellow graduate who got letters addressed to his name, comma, Esquire, and mine came Mrs. his name and his letter. And I said, if you ever want a penny from me, I earned the same degree. I'm an Esquire, and you will call me Esquire. And I object if anyone calls me, well, I'm a lawyer. I'm a litigator. I'm a trial lawyer. I'm not a woman lawyer. And that seems like a non-existent thing, and that goes to the institutions. I never joined the Women's Bar Association, because if you want to be a lawyer and have power, then you join the American Bar Association. And the first women's group I ever joined was when I moved to Chicago. I joined the Chicago Network, which has made a big difference in my life. When I said my friends, those are my friends who have helped me throughout my career. But I didn't know any women when I moved here, because all my partners at Jenner and Block, except for one, Joan Hall, was there, but everybody else was a man. I didn't have any women friends. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to join this organization just to meet some women professionals. But other than that, I have never joined a women's organization, because I just feel like the institutions, and you can either work inside the institution to change it, which I have certainly tried to do, or you can, as a college student, I was a civil rights activist working outside the system because I was a college student. What institution could I possibly belong to? So I've done it both ways, but and a very effective way of changing things is raising it inside of an organization.
If I could, I wanted to go back to your question about how do you expand borders and how do you expand so that folks on the outside can have more access in. And certainly I think about us as journalists, as well as policy, because you guys do this too, some of this, but Freedom of Information Act, when we teach people how to file those for themselves, we are expanding their access and we're giving them ability, right, we're widening that border. When we share, certainly when we share whatever coverage, whatever stories that we do or investigations, we certainly hope that that is adding to the public information and debate. When we have data and we share that, we put that in ways that people can get that information, more easily assess it and use it. Those are ways in which we try to expand media literacy, as we sometimes call it, but it's access for people who may not understand when you talk to a reporter what that means, what can happen with your information, how you don't have to accept the premise of the question, you can change that, you can answer the way you want. Those are things that we try to share at community listening sessions so that folks understand exactly what they have the right to and what our responsibilities are to them as journalists, in addition to what we want to get, quote unquote, from them. So.
Especially when it comes to community and it comes to leadership, I've been thinking a lot about the fact that we're in a bit of an interesting moment historically, in that, especially on like the very upper level of things, I think it would almost be fair to say that we've often seen a crisis of leadership. Meanwhile, within like various communities throughout the United States, we're seeing everyday people stand up and step up and do more for their community. I'm curious, especially, as you've said, like, you know, if the accountability tree falls in the forest, no one knows around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. You know, but like, knowing what to do, like being there, witnessing and hearing that the accountability tree has fallen is one thing. Knowing what to do about that is a skill set that has to be taught, and you have to go out and make mistakes, and you have to learn and grow. What advice do you all have for young leaders, for people who hope to be leaders in their community tonight? What would you say to yourselves starting out?
I'd say follow your passion, do what you want to do, sit at the center of the table, don't sit in the back row, and just go for it.
Take your children, grandchildren, nieces and nephews to the polls with you to vote. For me, that was a huge sort of defining moment in my childhood of going to vote, and this was back when they had like the switches and you pull the crank and like, you know, punch your ballot. And I would do that, and I would get so excited and pretend that I was actually voting, and I'd tell everyone I was voting. And I think, you know, establishing those patterns as early as possible, making voting feel like it is just, you know, the coolest thing to do, but also just like normalizing it. Like, you do it and then you go on with your day. It doesn't have to be this big theatrical thing. It is just something you do in order to participate, to ensure that power is held to account, and that normalizing that, I think, is huge. So, you know, make sure for March 17th primary, November general election, you bring young people with you to the polls to vote.
Two things. One, I would say lead from where you are, because you already can, and you have more influence in that sphere than you may know. But don't let what you've seen for people who have been in leadership, either the way they've either been treated or the way higher ups treat certain people in leadership, don't let it stop you. You're needed in the spaces that you're in. You're absolutely needed. And so sometimes in corporate journalism spaces, it is rough, right? It is, you know, it's a corporation, right? And so if you're middle management, sometimes the work may seem thankless, for example. But if you're not at the table, or if you're not anywhere where the decisions are being made, you have no input, even no matter how small it might be, to be able to say something that could benefit other folks on your team. If you're not there, it's just more difficult in the moment, right? You may have to come back later and try to undo something, but don't not do it because it's not easy. Do it anyway.
I regret coming at the end of that string of comments. I agree with all of those things. Jill's point about following your passion and persisting, I think just persist. I think When you are told in a job where your male predecessors have been praised for being assertive that your tone of voice is too harsh, persist. When you're told you can't do something for any number of reasons, persist. I'm so glad to hear Jane talk about people bringing children to vote. My daughters are here. I'm a believer in bringing your children along. I spoke my first words at a Mondale Ferrara rally, so that's like a model I come by, honestly. I think a willingness to be present and to speak your mind is vital. Just all to say, I wholeheartedly agree with all of those things. The other thing I would add is that, you know, leadership and hope and change, those are exercises of faith. That is about a willingness to believe that we can do better, that we can expect better, and that we can make our institutions better. And I think if everybody is willing to exercise a little bit of faith while doing all of the things that we've talked about up here, I think that's how we make it real.
I think what Deborah's saying is ask forgiveness, not permission.
Maybe not right away.
What has helped you most throughout your own careers? What have you drawn on, and what inspirations have you had that have helped you get to where you are?
I actually believed I could make a difference. That was it. Like, in a nutshell, I literally actually believed if I wrote a certain story that people weren't writing about, or if I helped a reporter along the way find their voice, right? If I poured into someone, that it would make a difference along the way. It's really corny, but it's true. It's true. Yeah, but it's not a blind faith, right? It's an informed faith. It is, yeah, it is.
Would either one of you mind, or anyone on the panel mind expanding upon an informed faith? Like, what does it mean? I think leadership is an act of faith.
But it's not like throwing a penny in a wishing well,
Right,
right? It's about
exactly.
like a willingness to do the things that will bring about something better. And it's really hard work. You know, you talked about the idea that women have to be twice as good to get half the results. And that's another idea that I have sort of mixed feelings about. But there's probably something to it. And I don't know, I mean, if somebody's gonna save democracy, I might bet on somebody who's already navigated that reality.
I also think, like, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, you do is so cool, you're so cool. And I'm like, I was like a punk rock art major. Like, I don't have some fancy like poli-sci degree or anything. Like, I was an artist in New York in another lifetime. And so it feels very surreal to be where I am today doing this work, you know, in less than 5 hours, I'm hopping on a plane to go to the United Nations for their women's conference. Like, very different than being a punk rock art student. But when I look back, you know, there's so many instances in my life that it makes sense how I ended up doing this, you know, whether it was getting so excited about like voting, you know, with my parents, or even when I think about like holding power to account, I just had this like very strange memory just now of like, I was always sort of made fun of for being like the kid police. Like, I was constantly reporting other people for bad behavior in school. I know, that's like not cool. I was like not cool.
We can get you a badge for that,
But
Jane.
if you think about like holding power to account, like I didn't like the idea that other people were getting away with doing something. Like, I was like, no, there's like rule of law, you have to follow the rules. And it's like, then I got cooler later in art school and I wasn't following the rules. But like, you know, I very much had this moral compass as to what following the rules looked like. And it's like, you know, I mean, you know, Jill is one of my heroes, but it's like, you know, I read All the President's Men for a middle school project and I was like, oh my gosh, how could the president do this? You know, it like completely like changed my perspective in just like, you know, how the world works when, you know, these instances are just like so vivid in, you know, my memory and experiences that I had. And then, you know, it's okay to change your mind about where you end up too. You know, it's like life is long, life is a journey, and, you know, try different stuff, do different things. You know, I very much inherently think that my role is incredibly creative. So, you know, I use my parents' money well, and that art degree, you know, is still in the work that I do. But, you know, it's like there's so much, you know, ways that you can kind of interact and participate and just have it be sort of, you know, natural and a part of your life.
So I have no idea how to answer your question because I was a shy, ordinary girl from a very middle-class family on Marine Drive. And But something my parents did made me think that I could try different things. And I mean, to your point, Jane, nobody has tried more careers than I have. I started out in occupational therapy when I started college, and then realized I'd have to cut up a cadaver in my second year and that I needed a different career. And then I graduated in journalism, and there was so much discrimination against women that I was offered a job on the woman's page, which was Tea Was Served and Mrs. Smith Board. You know, it's fine news, but I wanted to cover trials or foreign affairs or something. And so I thought, if I go to law school, an editor will take me seriously and I'll be able to get a better job in journalism. And then somehow I had to pay back my loans, and I thought, well, I'll practice law for a few years, and now 50 years later, I'm finally doing some journalism. So it took me a little while to get there, and in between, I ran some nonprofits, and I was a corporate officer at Motorola and at Maytag, and so I've done a lot of different careers. So yeah, I would say to everybody, keep trying until you find one that you're happy with. I'm pretty happy where I'm at now, but I can't tell you what let me do this, except that my parents let me do that, and I got a good education at the University of Illinois and was able to pursue other careers.
Thank you so much, everyone. I am going to be turning now to some questions submitted from the audience. The first question, and is kind of along the same theme, what advice do you have for young women just beginning their careers?
We already sort of answered that. Ask forgiveness, not permission.
So, and go into anti-corruption, because it's a growth industry?
As we say about Chicago, come for the weather, stay for the corruption.
I mean, I'm hoping it keeps me with BGA for a long time, so.
There's no shortage of work to do.
And with that question, if corruption is a growth industry,
Do you want to take this one, James?
what are the market disruptors we need to introduce to make corruption high risk, low reward?
This is a really good question.
Yes.
And this is exactly what I'm sort of thinking about when I talk about persuading people to expect better. For as long as we, the voting public, are willing to re-elect a public official while under indictment, it's hard to ask for better. Until we determine that abusing a position of public trust for one's own benefit is disqualifying, then we end up with the government we deserve. So I think the disruptor is expecting better, and you know, vote.
Well, with that too, the next question is, that has been starred. Where are the women who can lead us out of the question reads MAGA Trump era. I may even expand this actually though. I don't think that it has just been the last 10 years where we have seen a backsliding in rights. I think that this has been a bit of a long way coming. Where are the women who can lead us out of this backsliding?
In the room. Many of them are in the room.
In this room and in many, many other rooms. And I think wherever there are women who have taken advantage of being underestimated and beaten low expectations and won improbable victories, those are the women, those are the people who will lead us out of there. And I should say, there are lots of men out there fighting the good fight too. And so those people are in this room and they're in lots and lots of other
You didn't
rooms.
get any claps though. Come on, ladies.
When women lead, peace follows.
Really?
You think?
Oh yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Well, I'm
We
sort
just-
of with
we-
the view that men, I don't think a woman has to represent me. I think a man who has my values can represent me. So I think men and women leaders are necessary right now to fight against the diminution of our rights that's happening every day. I don't know about the rest of you, but I sometimes feel like I'm in 1939 Germany, and that my rights are just, you know, like being taken away, and that at the end, there's going to be no one left to protect me, because although I am doing what I can to stop it, but we all have to do something to stop it, or else it'll get to us and there'll be no one left to protect us.
To follow up with what Jill said, one of my favorite fun facts to sort of throw at people is Senator Richard Nixon was a chief sponsor of the ERA.
Yes?
And I love to sort of, and people are always like, what? Like, that's not what we know Nixon for. And I'm like, you know, with regards to the ERA, just so you all know, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but the ERA is the law of the land. It has met all the constitutional requirements to be published, and we've been in a constitutional crisis since it was not recognized when Virginia first ratified in 2020. But gender equality is an everybody problem, and everyone benefits. Men, women, everybody benefits when we have gender equality.
With that especially, because I think that is, it has the benefit, right, a rising tide lifts all boats. How do you lift as you climb? Put another way, as you find yourselves in a position of leadership, how do you also promote other people to, especially people of other marginalized statuses, also find themselves in positions of leadership and places to affect change?
By giving opportunities to other people based on qualities of intellect and ability, and just working to open those opportunities and mentoring. That's something that I have found very important. I'm lucky I had an amazing boss at the Department of Justice, my very first job, maybe the smartest, most wonderful person ever. And I've tried to carry that on by mentoring young men and young women. When I was head of career and technical education, I met a young man who just was a standout. He wrote me an email that was literate and written in sentences, and I've mentored him for many years now. So it's not just women, but men as well.
I agree with that. I think mentorship is so important. I will say one of the challenging things about working in government has been that there are not the sort of well-established mentorship networks that I think exist in some places in the private sector, and that's been interesting. But I will say, just to the point that there are lots of people out there fighting the good fight, I've had a handful of kind of transformative moments in my career which came in the form of somebody I worked for who thought that I had something to say and was willing to hear me say it. And especially early in my career, many of those people were men for whom I worked who thought that I had something to say and who let me say it. And so I've given that a lot of thought. That was really transformative. And so I've tried to be that boss for a lot of people.
I think that when you're in a system, and sometimes you automatically, you know some of the areas in which that system is failing. So in a media organization, for example, if you have been a middle manager and you understand that in order for you to progress or someone under you to progress, they need to have reporters who cover certain things, who get on the front page all the time. They need to have edited investigations, for example. And you know, though, that typically what happens is the only way you get to edit an investigation is if you've been an investigative reporter. The only way you get to be an investigative reporter is if you've actually written an investigation. And the only way to write one is if you're on an investigative team as an investigative reporter. So it's breaking those kind of cycles for people and helping them, positioning them for success within an organization in ways where you make sure they don't get all of reporters cover your ears. You make sure they don't get all of the reporters who won't be doing the kinds of things that will help progress someone's career. You make sure that they have a mix of experiences and leadership opportunities, visual opportunities to serve in front of the higher up managers. You make sure that the things that typically can stop someone's career kind of mid-track, you try to make sure those things don't happen to them. I kind of call that mentorship. I also call that sponsorship, right? And so those are, they go hand in hand to me. And so that's how.
I think we are also taking questions from the audience. Fantastic. So I think we're going to, I'm going to give up, we need 2 mics. I'll give up mine.
That's Grace and Meredith, everybody. Give it up for Grace and Meredith. two wonderful reporters on the state team, the Illinois Answers Project.
So raise a hand somewhere.
Thank you. What a wonderful panel. And so many of you have talked about voting. I do a lot of public speaking around Chicago, and I'll tell you the thing that most people are very worried about is that we're not going to have free and fair elections. And I know that's a kind of a MAGA talking point to want us to believe that we're not going to, but I'm wondering what you think the most important thing we can do as individuals to make sure that we do have free and fair elections.
Boy, that is such a hard question because, you know, the seizure of voting records has now expanded and they've taken the boxes from Arizona. And I think it was Jamie Raskin today was saying, you know, they learned from the first search in Georgia, and so they're doing a better job on the second one, and they'll do better on the third, and all of this is in preparation for the midterms. And that's scary to me. It is very, very frightening. We were warned by Project 2025, and we didn't take preventative steps. And I think the only thing you can do, one is obviously the league is going to lead us in having a massive turnout. And it's not just in Illinois, because Illinois is pretty much a safe place. But if you're going to volunteer, go to Wisconsin, go to Michigan. Those are places where a few votes per precinct can really make a difference in whether, for example, right now Wisconsin is trying to have a trifecta of both houses and the governor being Democrats, and it's possible. And the Wisconsin Democratic Party has very good leadership, and if they do, it could protect us in gerrymandering, it can protect us on their Supreme Court. There's a lot of things that can be done. So think about, you know, do you want to write postcards? Do you want to go door to door? I know a lot of people are afraid to go door to door. I find it really engaging, unless I see, you know, a Trump sign in front of a house where I then won't enter. I think it's engaging to try to talk to people about why you believe what you believe and have a human dialogue with people. I think that's an important thing to do.
Yeah, you know, I think we are currently in a sort of elevated crisis of, you know, concern around elections. But I would like to point out, and as someone who has done election protection for many years, you know, Illinois, we have great voter registration laws. Our voter turnout, there's stuff to be improved on. But, you know, I've been doing election protection where entire county have had blackout of their voting machines. You know, I have seen firsthand people be intimidated at the polls with, you know, varying kinds of weapons. I have seen elected officials mislead voters by, you know, giving them cards in their mailboxes telling them that their polling places has changed, and it, you know, ends up being an empty parking lot. Like there is a history of, especially in sort of marginalized communities here in Illinois even, there is a huge problem and barrier to participation around elections that causes people to historically choose not to participate, not to engage. But also, you know, when people have bad experiences at the polls, the chances of them participating can end up being quite low. So that's where I, you know, sort of stress, especially making sure young people, if they're voting for the first time, go with them, make sure it is a great first-time experience, because the chances of them participating again in future elections will be a lot higher. But also ensure that, you know, sign up to be a poll watcher. Sign up, you know, the league just launched a peacekeeping initiative around elections to ensure that, you know, hopefully nothing happens at polling places, but that people still feel, you shouldn't have to be in fear of something happening. It should be just second nature that we're ensuring people have positive and safe experiences every election cycle. It doesn't matter, you know, threats coming down from the federal government or different states. This should just be second nature, how we interact around election day to ensure that people feel safe and secure, you know, across all different kinds of communities.
If I may say, because you guys know more about this obviously than I, but way back in 2000 for the election in Florida. I was in Florida for the issues of the hanging Chad. Many of you may remember that, right? Or have read about it in history books. Alex. Yeah, you, Alex. One of the things that surprised me so much was the fact that people didn't know their rights. The right that you have to a provisional ballot, for example. That we had spent so much time, and still are, spend so much time, telling people to get to the polls. And then they went to find it and their polling place was gone and they didn't know what to do. So being prepared, I would think, knowing like, what will I do if my polling place isn't there? Like, what would I do? Versus waiting until election day and then going there and finding out that your polling place is actually gone. I think those things were extraordinarily upsetting for people. When I spent maybe 2 or 3 weeks in Florida and then watching them decide whether the Chads were hanging or not, but also going around and talking to people about their experiences on election day when they went to where they were supposed to vote and it was closed, or someone told them that they weren't registered to vote and they didn't know they could ask for a provisional ballot. Like all those things, if you imagine those things, the worst case scenarios and what you might be able to do, what would you do? What should you have the right to? Then that I think might also help. It may not help the experience, but it might at least help, it may be a plan of action, and share that with the people that you know.
866 our vote.
Texas. It just
Yeah.
happened in Texas again, where the polling place was like,
Yep.
and then the court said, you have to stay open later, and then the appellate court said, no, you don't.
866 our vote is a national election protection hotline. It's very easy to memorize, but make sure, anyone with their plans to go and vote, 866 our vote. Nonpartisan.
Sophie, we have 2
hotline.
questions over
I
here.
think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, so
Okay, we've
please.
got 2 right here.
I just wanted to say, Ms. Winebanks, that I am a criminal defense attorney, a federal criminal defense attorney, and I tried a case at the end of 2025, a public corruption case where both AUSAs were women, both criminal defense attorneys were women, the court clerk was a woman. It was
The judge?
And the judge was a man and the defendant was a man, but next time they will hopefully both be women. Or hopefully not. But thank you so much for forging the path. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for this evening. It's all been very insightful. Just as there is a glass ceiling, there's also a glass cliff. And this is the phenomenon where women are more likely to be appointed to top leadership roles during times of crisis. And this often sets them up for failure. And studies have shown that firms and organizations are more likely to appoint women during times of crisis. What have been your experiences in dealing with this, like strategies or strategies that you've seen successful with other women, especially as many of you have been the first women to be appointed in your roles?
Oh, give me the microphone. You all are wrong for that.
I'm stumped. I mean, the glass ceiling, I
No, the
can
glass
certainly talk
cliff.
about, but the glass cliff.
Certainly. And so I've seen this in newsrooms across the country, right? And I've been this, right? Where you are the first person of color or the first woman to take the helm of something. It's just that once you take it, the resources have already been depleted. So you're taking something and you've been brought in to change it and fix it and restore it back to its former glory, if not better. But you are to do so with fewer staff and less of all the bells and whistles than the people who came before you had, and they didn't get the job done either. So I think if you take such a role, understand what you've kind of signed up for, advocate for as many of the resources as you can possibly get, and make sure that the expectations are realistic, even though the expectations should be, and for yourself, they may very well be aspirational, to ensure that you are not, if there's a way to ensure that you are not kind of being held hostage or prisoner or being or whatever else we might call it, to what someone else couldn't do with twice as much as you have now. But it's an excellent question, and I think about certain people who have taken over media outlets that 20 years ago we would not, and who are women, that we would never have been given the opportunity to run. And we weren't given the opportunity to run them until all the money was gone.
I want to say one of the questions that we started off for you all, the audience, at the beginning of this, had to do with how hopeful you were feeling. I believe now, oh, the slide disappeared. I thought there was a slide to answer whether or not you were feeling more hopeful now at the end of our conversation. And let's assume yes. We're gonna go across the board 100%.
We're supposed to make them hopeful?
No. I appreciate everyone being honest. I think it's important to talk candidly and honestly about where we are at and how we were feeling. And I want to, first and foremost, thank you so much for everyone who attended, but especially thank you to our 4 panelists. Please, everyone, give them a round of applause. That was an inspiring and thoughtful conversation, and thank you all for lending your voices and your time and all of your thoughts for this and for the BGA. If you enjoyed this evening, I hope you all join us on May 7th for Beyond the Byline, featuring the Richard H. Driehaus Awards for Investigative Journalism and a conversation with Erin Haynes, editor-at-large of the 19th. You'll find little table tents at each of your tables with a QR code around the room if you'd like to learn more. And finally, thank you all for joining us for Women Who Hold Power to Account and for supporting the work of the BGA. Please enjoy the reception and please keep the conversations going at your table. Thank you.